Joker, Folie, Deux seems to have critics and the general audience united on their disdain for it. After learning about the negative reception to the film, I was intrigued to find out for myself if all the negativity was valid. I'm not a fan of musicals, so the fact that this film was described as one was off-putting to me, but I went into it with an open mind anyway, and actually, for the first 10 or 20 minutes, the film seemed alright. I was wondering if perhaps the negative reception to it had been overblown, but as it continued, I discovered that no. Alas, Joker, Folie, Deux is terrible. Let's get into why that is, and what could have been done with some of the elements in it to make for a better film, or at least one that I would have enjoyed more. Spoilers ahead. Despite the consensus on the quality of this film, there are those who commend it, and to be fair, the film does have some good elements, so I'll start by discussing those. I like the opening cartoon sequence. It appeared to be setting up a fairly interesting story and style of film. Unfortunately, that setup goes unfulfilled, but in isolation, this opening is good. The cinematography is superb, in keeping with the style of the first film, and making this sequel feel very much like it exists in that same murky, stylized 80s world of the first one. The acting is good. I've never watched anything Lady Gaga's acted in before, so didn't know what to expect from her, but I'm pleasantly surprised at how much I like her performance. She also has a striking look, and generally captivating charisma on screen. This is a new interpretation of Harley Quinn, named Harleen Lee Quinzel, far less cartoonish and flamboyant, and I think it works rather well in the context of this Joker's film world. Okay, so that's about the extent of the good stuff. There are probably a few other things I could list, but these are the main things which stand out to me. A pretty short list, sadly. Moving on to the bad stuff about the film. It's very boring. Near the start, I was wondering if that was going to be its biggest fault, and all the other audience condemnation of it was perhaps hyperbolic, because the story seemed coherent enough to begin with. Initially, it wasn't some disjointed mess of a narrative, although, again, as the film progressed further, I was eventually disabused of the notion that its worst flaw was that it was merely boring, as if that wouldn't have been bad enough. That leads me on to talking about the musical numbers. Word of this aspect of the film might have made a lot of people confused before actually watching it. It seemed like a strange choice to make the film a musical. But what's the execution like? Does the musical component work well? No, it does not. It's even worse than I would have expected. Almost all the musical parts were excruciating to sit through, and every time another one started, I just kept thinking, please God, make it stop. There's only one solidly good musical number, and one other which I enjoyed, although I'd understand why others wouldn't have. The solidly good musical number was the one in the courtroom, where Arthur fantasizes about hitting the judge with his own gavel. There's a lot going on in that sequence. It's engaging, kind of exciting, and stylish, and it gives us some insight into Arthur's thoughts and violent desires. The other musical number which I like is the one where Joker and Harleen sing on stage together, like Sonny and Cher. This is partly because I just enjoy Lady Gaga's singing there, but mostly because of how that scene ends, with Harleen pulling a gun on Arthur and shooting him, the studio audience laughing about it like it's some comic part of the stage act. It's bizarre, compelling, and provides good insight into the doubts Arthur may be developing about those who idolise him. It also provides foreshadowing of Quinzel eventually turning against Arthur. To reiterate, these are the only two musical numbers where something interesting actually happens, where there's some story progression or insight into Joker's psychology integrated into them. Otherwise, most of the musical sections just contain characters singing while moving around a room, or standing still, or sitting in one place. There's very little theatricality to most of them. They're pointless intrusions on the story, almost giving the feeling of when an ad pops up on a YouTube video, and you have to sit through it until you can finally get back to the video again. A lot of the time, during relatively compelling scenes, when I was interested in what a character would say next, one of them would start singing, and then just keep going on and on, completely undercutting the drama and intrigue of the scene. Time and time again, the film gets in its own way way by setting up good stuff and then just ruining it by making someone start singing for ages without moving from the spot they're in, sometimes with no music. A lot of these moments made me zone out until they were over or just cringe through them. But enough about the music. Let's get to some of the story elements which stand out to me for all the wrong reasons. So, a character from the first Joker film, Sophie Dumond, returns to give testimony in Arthur's trial. This is noteworthy because in the first film, Arthur invades her apartment, makes the menacing gun-to-the-head gesture at her with his fingers, and she looks terrified. It's all very ominous and scary. Then he leaves her apartment, and she doesn't appear again for the rest of the film. Now, I interpreted that as implication that Arthur had murdered Sophie, but it was left ambiguous, so we didn't know for sure. I find it annoying that she appears in the sequel because it undermines the ambiguity of whether or not Arthur murdered her in the first film. While that may be the case, since what happened there was ambiguous, it meant there was room for the character to reappear in a sequel if desired. So while I may not like that choice, it's not a major violation. I think the testimony Sophie gives in Arthur's trial is, as I believe I'm right in saying, it conflicts with the first film. I'll explain and tell me if I'm wrong. In her testimony, Sophie says that she never reported Arthur for breaking into her apartment because his mother apologised on his behalf and asked Sophie not to report him. But by the time Arthur entered Sophie's apartment uninvited, his mother was already comatose in hospital, and she never left. Arthur eventually murdered her in there, so she couldn't have spoken to Sophie about the intrusion incident at any point. I haven't rewatched the first Joker for a while, so let me know if I'm missing something here. Perhaps I've made a mistake, but if I'm right, this part of the sequel seems like a very careless error. Anyway, what about Harleen Lee Quinzel? While I stated that I like the portrayal of the Harley Quinn iteration in this film, and I think the interactions she has with Arthur are engaging to watch, unfortunately, the conclusion to the story between her and Arthur is very anticlimactic. It just sort of slowly rolls to a lackluster end where they part ways. It's yet more wasted potential in this film. They part ways because Quinzel is not interested in Arthur after he renounces the Joker identity. This is part of the way in which his character is very much regressed in this film. He undergoes a character regression which makes him even less than what he was at the start of the first Joker film. The transformation he went through to become a monster gets reversed. It's so narratively unsatisfying, much like the ending of Joker Folie, Deux, which is also kind of anticlimactic and totally lacks the punch of the first film's ending. As I've mentioned, there are things that could have been done to make for a better film here, or at least one that would appeal to me more. Here they are. Firstly, I'd want the musical numbers to be cut to an absolute maximum of 3, and to make sure they each served a purpose as well, rather than being just dumped into the film for no real reason. That is, if musical numbers even had to be included, because just scrapping that whole aspect altogether would have also been acceptable. Next, I'd have wanted the film to get to the trial section much sooner. There's too much time wasted just meandering through protracted, boring stuff in Arkham Asylum before things actually get moving with the story and the trial starts. Finally, the story between Joker and Harleen could have been more central and given a better conclusion. Making the whole film about them would have been preferable for me, maybe with them escaping Arkham Asylum and going on a Thelma and Louise or Natural Born Killers style crime spree together, where they learn about each other's true selves. The veils of performance they each wear begin to slip, their relationship deteriorates, and they turn against each other. Or they get through it and become a stronger force of mayhem afterwards. Or there's some sort of tragic ending to their story together, or something. Anything like that would have been far more appealing to me than what was done. Again, wasted potential. Overall, while Joker Folie, Deux has some merits and should be commended for attempting something different, the best elements are not made good enough use of, and the film is excruciating to sit through. I was glad when the credits finally rolled. It's a shame that this will now tarnish the legacy of the first film, which garnered so much praise and made such a cultural impact. At least we still have the first one, and have no obligation to revisit this sequel. It can join the list of other beloved films which had disastrous sequels. Anyway, what do you think? Do you agree with my take on Joker, Folie, Deux, or do you like the film? Let me know in the comments below. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, see you next time.